Hello friends, welcome to another odd video of me talking to the camera. Today I want to tell you about how I personally would use beta blockers if I was still a serious weightlifter. Now, this is not medical advice. And first of all, beta blockers are all controlled substances in the US. You cannot or should not get one without a doctor's prescription. You can easily get a doctor's prescription, visit your cardiologist, visit your psychiatrist. You can get it a variety of ways. And I'm not a medical doctor, and this isn't medical advice, and I know nothing about medicine, right? But so I used beta blockers while I was lifting weights, and also I've learned a lot more about them as I've gotten more into health and longevity and about their effects in the body. And sometimes I look back at my weightlifting career and some of the things I think about that I could have done, I regret not knowing. And it happens to be that because of the way I entered YouTube through Amin actually, a lot of the people who watch the channel are bodybuilders or PED users and may benefit from the knowledge that I wish I would have had. So today I think I will talk about beta blockers in a second part. So I've did a video, probably by the time you see this it'll have been the week before, but I'm not sure, about beta blocking because someone asked me about it on my Ask Leo post on Instagram, which is where you should ask questions if you're interested in getting questions answered. So someone asked me about whether it would be useful to take them on their days off or something like that, and it was a session that I had with Lucie, so I went into the details of the health implications. I used a lot of citations. I described the different things that you have to consider when you use beta blockers. But I still received a lot of questions on the comment section. Although, it's not that the video got a lot of views. It seems nobody was interested. But nonetheless, I got a lot of questions on the comment section, and there seems to be people that are interested and found it helpful. But they still have more questions. So I'm going to tell you guys the way I would approach it. Especially thinking that, say I'm using anabolic androgenic steroids and lifting weights, God forbid, and I want to basically prevent the deleterious effects of the sympathetic nervous tone. Now remember, sympathetic nervous tone, we have two nervous tones. One of them is a fight or flight one. That one's called the sympathetic nervous tone. So if I want to prevent the deleterious effects of the sympathetic nervous tone from affecting my health in the long term, in particular, from preventing my heart from enlarging too much because of an increased heart rate, but also in other terms because of increased inflammatory cytokines, which we know from the previous video that long-term beta blocker use reduces interleukin 6, which is an inflammatory cytokine, and increases healing from traumatic injury, from wounds, from surgeries. So if I wanted to protect myself in a way. Now, I should mention another thing. Anabolic androgenic steroids, they do increase the sympathetic nervous tone, and one of the ways they do this is by changing the function of the brain. I have a video, maybe I'll link it here, called How Testosterone Affects the Brain. It's not about how testosterone and other androgens affect the brain acutely, which is very difficult to understand. But it's about how it seems to change the brain over long periods of time. One of the things it appears to do is increase norepinephrine, by the way, is also called noradrenaline. So adrenaline has two forms. One is called noradrenaline, one's called adrenaline. They both act on similar receptors. But in the brain, noradrenaline is more active than adrenaline. So it seems that anabolic androgenic steroids increase the norepinephrine action in the brain, which is one of the reasons some steroids like trenbolone make people anxious or make people nervous or uncomfortable. And not all steroids do that all the time because they have other effects in the brain as well and generally in the body, but they do that. And they also increase heart rate, generally speaking. Most anabolic androgenic steroids will increase your basal heart rate. But that's not the only way that they cause benefits, right? So that is one way. So for example, I used to be a strength lifter. So when you take a compound that immediately increases your strength, the way it's doing that is by the sympathetic nervous tone. It's either enhancing we don't know exactly how, by the way, nobody knows, but it's either increasing the efficiency of your nervous tone signaling or just increasing the sympathetic nervous tone, the fight or flight nervous tone. So it's either increasing the efficiency or the signal. So when you take, for example, Anadrol, half an hour later or 45 minutes later, you will immediately be stronger in the gym. And so this doesn't mean necessarily that taking Anadrol over a long period of time will cause you increasing strength gains in some kind of linear fashion. But it could increase every time you go to the gym, your weights go up by 5%, and over time that could cause you to gain strength over the long term, right? So, but that's not the only way they cause people to gain strength. Another way is by gaining muscle. And the muscle gains aren't necessarily through the sympathetic nervous tone. And when a muscle gets larger, it also gets stronger. So there's a couple of things going on, right? So you may be able to limit the sympathetic nervous tone stimulation without harming your actual results, especially if you're a bodybuilder, that much. So I wanted to describe to you guys how I would do it personally, because people were asking. And also Vigorous Steve commented on the last video. I mentioned nebivolol. Watch that video if you haven't seen it, but I mentioned nebivolol, which was mentioned to me by somebody else on Instagram. I didn't know about it, and Vigorous Steve apparently takes it during his off season as well, and he doesn't notice a strength decrease from it, which is what we were thinking. So here's what I would do. First of all, you guys should know a little bit about the sympathetic nervous tone signals, which are, a lot of them are adrenaline and cortisol. So cortisol increases while you're asleep. If you want to learn more about that, watch my series on sleep. You can go to playlists and click Leo on sleep. But the point is, it increases while you're asleep, and cortisol is actually one of the things that wakes you up in the morning. And it continues to rise, tends to rise until it peaks around 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Sometime around then, and then it decreases. It may have a second bump, and then it comes to its trough, which means at the bottom of the graph when you go to sleep. Now, some people have insomnia, they get a second peak right before they sleep. That's called the sleep onset insomnia. Others have the sleep maintenance insomnia, where they get another cortisol peak in the middle of their night and they wake up, which may have happened to me yesterday since I've been awake since 2 a.m. But nonetheless, so cortisol, that's what cortisol has been doing. So if you think of it this way, your sympathetic nervous tone, just judging by cortisol, is probably the most active around 11 a.m. So if I didn't have a job that required me to go to work at 7 or 8 in the morning, what I would do is I would schedule my workouts to be around 11 a.m. or so. Now, I was a strength lifter, so I know that I was actually the most strong around 2 to 3 p.m. And, anyone who lifts in that kind of way, most people notice at least they're not as strong before noon as they are in the morning. However, if you ever do try to work out in the morning for a period of time, even as a strength lifter, I noticed myself. I mean, I've squatted very high amounts of weights at 5 in the morning. If you do it for long enough, your body adapts, the neural connections adapt, and you wake up faster and the nerves get stronger. It's probably not as ideal as later in the day, but so what I would do if I didn't have a job, I would work out around 11 a.m. If I do have a job, I would do it before the job in the morning. Once you work out, or once I work out, I would then, while I'm in the gym, so first of all, so let's discuss what I'll take. So first of all, I wouldn't take nebivolol. The reason why I wouldn't take nebivolol personally is, number one, it has a long half-life, a very long half-life. So it's going to be in your system when you're working out. Now, Vigorous Steve says it doesn't affect his weights. I've never tried nebivolol. I don't actually have experience with this. It may not affect your ability to lift. And if that is true, then this isn't so much a consideration. But the second consideration, which is a consideration, is it increases nitric oxide synthesis in the body. And nitric oxide, as I described in the other video, the nitric oxide synthase can uncouple from the production of nitric oxide and end up producing more free radicals in the body. So if it does do that, which means these are what antioxidants deal with. If it does do that, you may incur more cellular damage over time. So I wouldn't personally want to do that. I'm talking about what I would do. I wouldn't want to do that. Another thing is that, so nebivolol is very selective of the beta-1 receptor. Now remember, you have alpha and beta adrenaline receptors. It's very selective of the beta-1. The beta-1 is very much impactful on the heart. The beta-2 receptors, unfortunately, are found in many other places of the nervous system, including, they're also found in the lungs. So they affect your ability to breathe. If you have a serious case of asthma, it may be an issue for you. So you may want a selective one, right? But the thing is, the studies that show really long-term benefits in terms of health tend to be not selective, and they tend to be lipophilic. So the one I would take personally would be propranolol. Propranolol is not very selective at all between the beta-1 and the beta-2 receptors. It has much more evidence backing its health impacts in the long term. For me, I've been taking it a few days now, and I don't notice anything to do with my breathing capacity, and I actually have a mild case of asthma, had it all my life. So it's not really affecting me. It's also very lipophilic, so it goes into the brain, which we got into in the first video. But the point is, I would take propranolol before I even leave the gym, because it takes about half an hour to get active in your body. So right after leaving the gym, so I would go into the gym basically off any beta blocker. I would work out, I would be able to get my heart rate as high as I need to get it to be able to exercise the heart. Of course, personally, I wouldn't be taking stimulants, especially if you're taking anabolic androgenic steroids. You're already taking a stimulant. The steroid itself is a stimulant. It is stimulating adrenaline directly. So you already have a stimulant. Now, personally, I was a big fan of taking, in terms of pre-workouts, I used to take Anadrol or testosterone suspension, because why would I just want to raise my sympathetic nervous tone without having that kind of efficient muscle contraction which comes from those? But maybe I would take that, but I wouldn't take like a caffeine or anything. So then after the workout, even before I leave the gym, I would take the propranolol. 40 milligrams is probably what I would take. And then I would leave the gym, and probably I would not take another one through the day if I was really focused on getting stronger. But if I wasn't focused that much on getting stronger and just wanted to mitigate my the results, the health impacts of my lifestyle, I would take 2. So if I was really focused on getting stronger though, I would only take 1. So I would take 1 propranolol as I'm leaving the gym, and then I would stop. The half-life is about 6 hours, depending on how quick of a metabolizer you are. I'm a very fast metabolizer, so for me it's a little bit different. You can check your genes. There are certain enzymes that metabolize different drugs. So I would take that, and then for the next few hours, immediately my sympathetic nervous tone, specifically adrenaline, would not be as functional. So my heart rate would decrease, I would have a resting period, I would be able to heal better. And over time, if you do this over a period of years, you have lowered the amount that your heart beats all those years. But you still have, by the morning, especially if you're only taking once a day, by the morning you have barely any propranolol in your system. So it's really not affecting your workout. So by doing this, and naturally your sympathetic nervous tone declines at nighttime. So unless you're having insomnia or something, you probably won't need to take it then, and your heart rate declines, and all that declines probably after 7 p.m. for most people. So your heart rate declines by the nighttime, you go to sleep, you get woken up by cortisol, the sympathetic nervous tone, and then again you go to the gym, you take it, you shut it off during that time period right afterwards. Now when normal people work out, their heart rate stays elevated for a long time, and that's one of the reasons the metabolism stays elevated. And by the way, this will reduce your metabolism, just like taking an agonist of the adrenaline receptors like clenbuterol will increase your metabolism. But it's also going to preserve your heart in a way. I mean, this is not medical advice, but technically, scientifically, if you think about it, the heart is beating less. The reasons for hearts growing is because they beat more or they beat at higher pressure. So the arteries, the vascular system is more tight. That means your heart has to beat more. It has pressure. That's like, it's a muscle, right? So it has to beat with a stronger force, or it has to beat more often. If you're taking anabolic androgenic steroids, especially if you're taking like, it depends which ones you're taking, but in general, they're going to increase your heart rate all the time. So if you're taking that drug that increases your heart rate, but you're really trying to get muscle, you might want to decrease the heart rate right after, right? So this is what I would personally do. And I took some notes just to make sure I don't forget anything. I should mention a couple more things. So some people will tell you, oh, but NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, have been shown to reduce muscle recovery when you go to work out and stuff like that. NSAIDs are different than beta blockers. Beta blockers work directly on adrenaline on 1 or 2 receptors, or sometimes 3 receptors. There's some of them that also block the alpha-1 receptor, and we talked about nebivolol last time, which is unique. But an NSAID reduces inflammation in general in the body. So this has a much wider impact. They're also not healthy to take, and they also don't do anything for your heart. So these are apples and oranges. Now we do know that healing is increased in inflammatory states when people take, and I cited this in the last one, wound healing, traumatic brain injury, all this kind of stuff. So even if imagine it reduced your healing slightly, the impact it has on your heart is wonderful. And not just on your heart, but your psychology also, because the slow predominance of noradrenaline in your brain, norepinephrine, is not something that's healthy. This is what leads to anxiety over time and stuff like that. So, and especially if you're using a lipophilic one like propranolol, it's actually having an effect on your brain as well. The second thing I wanted to mention is people have different biologies. So someone commented on the video about the beta blocker saying, hey, I took a beta blocker and it was the worst feeling I've ever experienced in my life. Nobody should take these things. I think he said nobody should take these things. I'm not sure. Don't be offended if I misunderstood. But people have been saying this about SSRIs on my videos. quite often, and I don't know if he said this about beta blockers, but he also said it's as bad as antidepressants. So I just want to be clear, guys, this is crazy talk. Drugs affect people differently. We are not twins. Our biologies, we're similar, but we're not that similar. Some of us are schizophrenic. Some of us have no mental disorders. So if you give a person with no mental disorder antipsychotic, which blocks a lot, not all, but most of them block a lot of your neurotransmitter receptors in your brain, he's going to feel like a zombie. But antipsychotic, if you don't do that to him, he has hallucinations, right? Somebody who has an overactive sympathetic nervous tone, because the person who commented, he was saying he had a heart problem, and that's why they gave him this beta blocker. That's different. You have a heart problem, you might not have an overactive sympathetic nervous tone. So decreasing the action of adrenaline, you may have normal action of adrenaline in your body. So you're feeling actually down. Whereas somebody who's on steroids, or somebody like me who has a naturally high sympathetic nervous tone, I feel way better on a beta blocker. I actually feel better. And it's not a major difference. I mean, I feel way better, I'm exaggerating slightly, but I feel better. I certainly have never felt worse on a beta blocker in my life, in any scenario. And when I took them when I was taking AAS, I didn't even feel the effect. And in fact, to be honest, I barely feel the effect from atenolol, because atenolol mainly affects the peripheries, and I have a tremor, so it decreases my tremor slightly. But propranolol, I noticed a slight calming effect psychologically, which I feel really is great. So, you know, one size doesn't fit all, and one drug certainly doesn't fit all. There are some people that take, for example, I mean, these are weird examples I'm giving you guys, but just to see the extremes, you know. In philosophy, you use extreme example to prove, not to prove something, but to show something. Some people take Tylenol a few times and they get liver failure and die. You know, other people have been taking Tylenol their whole lifetimes. No, their livers are fine, right? I've known some alcoholics, they drink huge amounts of alcohol, their liver is completely fine. Another guy took Tylenol a few times, he lost his liver. So biologies are very different. You can't say, so if it doesn't work for you, it's probably because in this case, you don't have an overactive sympathetic nervous tone. Specifically, you don't produce a lot of adrenaline. Another thing I wanted to mention is that, so our brains are, so one thing is just generally like your adrenaline in your body, you might feel tired, you might feel whatever, but another thing is actually how your brain functions. So many people don't realize that noradrenaline, which is a neurotransmitter, norepinephrine, is produced out of dopamine by the enzyme dopamine beta hydroxylase. Now, there are many things that can affect how much norepinephrine affects your brain. So for example, there are degradation enzymes that degrade dopamine directly, so it may not get a chance to be converted into norepinephrine. Like one of the famous ones is monoamine oxidase, but there are others. Or it can be converted, if it's not degraded, into norepinephrine. But there are single nucleotide polymorphisms that determine how efficient your enzyme, dopamine beta hydroxylase, is at converting dopamine to norepinephrine. So some people convert more dopamine more rapidly into norepinephrine, like myself. And this is one of the things I check in my cognitive enhancement package, which is a DNA analysis thing for people before I advise them on, you know, what supplements to use or whatever, because this impacts a lot of things tremendously. So I won't go into too much detail here because it's a little off topic, but what I'm trying to say is, say you're someone who converts dopamine very rapidly into norepinephrine, but then you take a lipophilic beta blocker, which blocks norepinephrine's impact to some degree in your brain, to some degree. Then what happens? You already have less dopamine because you're converting it quickly, but then you're blocking the effect of norepinephrine. You were more reliant on norepinephrine than somebody whose enzyme is less active and they're having more dopamine. True, these are different neurotransmitters that have different functions, but you're now at a net loss of neurotransmitters. So that may be why you feel dead inside or whatever it is, right? So, you know, people's biologies aren't the same. And so whenever you tell someone your experience with a drug, you have to say, this was my experience with a drug. I mean, we can all agree that nobody feels great on trenbolone, right? But some people feel sexually fine on trenbolone, some people don't, right? Some people, well, DECA has a more general outcome, especially when combined with testosterone. But you know what I mean? Drugs have different effects on different people, even qualitatively. So that's the second thing I wanted to say. Last thing I wanted to say is about vasodilation. So that should be done in a separate video, but I just wanted to mention, you know, if I was trying to protect my heart, I don't know what I'm going to title this video, but it's probably going to be beta block or something. But if I was really trying to protect my heart, I would also be doing something to dilate the blood vessels. But personally, I wouldn't be using something that affects nitric oxide, because that could end up causing me more reactive oxygen molecules that can then cause damage to DNA, which is a concern for me. I would be using something that dilates the blood vessel through angiotensin. So that's what I did personally when I was lifting weights. It was fine for me. It's true you will get a little bit weaker. It's not huge. You will get weaker because, think of it this way. When you squat, for example, if you wear knee wraps, you compress your body, which makes it somehow stronger, right? So your blood vessels a lot of your body's blood vessels also, when they're compressed, you're stronger, which is one of the ways that adrenaline makes you stronger also, by the way. So if you vasodilate, you become a little bit less strong, but I highly doubt that it will cause you to have less muscle gains. So, but I should do that in a separate video. Anyway, I hope this was helpful for you guys to imagine how to do it. This thing had propranolol, for example, and metoprolol and atenolol have short half-lives. So it doesn't mean you have to take them all day. As long as you schedule your workout in a certain way, it may not even affect you. And then you have nebivolol also. And for the people that are psychologically affected by the lipophilic ones like propranolol, you have non-lipophilic ones, or metoprolol. You have atenolol, which is what I took for a very long time. Now, personally, I've only been a few days on propranolol. I prefer it. But for somebody that feels lethargy and all of that, just take one that doesn't enter the brain. Atenolol is horrible at entering the brain. So it's going to affect your periphery and your heart. Yeah, done. Simple. You don't have to quit your medication that your cardiologist gave you. You just do some research. All right, guys? So I hope this was helpful for everyone, including the gentleman who had the cardiovascular stuff. And remember, this is not medical advice. Speak to your cardiologist, specifically determine whether this is healthy for you and get a prescription. Thank you guys so much for listening. I'll see you next time.